Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. That photo of James brings all sorts of memories and feelings. James, we continue to miss you. So, welcome to our third annual celebration of the James Thindwa Organizing Fund Symposium. Thank you for being here, and thank you to our panelists for saying yes when we invited them and said yes, yes, yes. This symposium provides us with an opportunity to remember the late James Thindwa, who went to be with the ancestors on January 2020. James was a dedicated activist in Chicago and beyond, a beloved former member of the Grassroots Fund board, and a longtime resident of Chicago. James had a passionate commitment to social justice and an unbiding belief in the power of ordinary people to change the world. It is in this vein that we gather each year to discuss current issues and to get inspired to continue doing this work that was very close and important to James. This year, our focus is on labor organizing. In the last couple of years, we have seen a resurgence of union organizing that is traditional and yet different. Traditional because this union organizing seeks better wages, better working conditions, and a say in the places that we trade our labor for pay. However, it is different in that it is spearheaded by people affected by the issue: the Amazon worker, the Starbucks worker, the nonprofit worker, and other workers who have successfully organized for a union, and those who are currently planning their organizing strategies even as we go live. This labor organizing was very, very close to James. Time and time again, he reminded us of the intersection of labor, of livable wages, housing, education, and community safety, and the harm that unleashed capitalism inflicts on communities. James dedicated his life drawing attention to this unleashed capitalism through the many speeches that he gave, his work at Jobs with Justice, organizing to get the first Walmart in the city of Chicago to pay a living wage, and working on a worker run model during the takeover of Republican windows, among many, many, many more actions. We remember James, his work, his dedication, and his commitment to keep the fight for jobs, jobs with justice. Today's program and your participation is part of James's legacy. Before I pass it over to Michael Aguha, our Rockstar Program Director, we have an ask. So each year we give grants from the James Thindwa Grassroots Organizing Fund to grantees who are organizing daily, daily, daily to bring us all closer to justice. They are organizing on housing justice, labor justice, environmental justice, immigration justice, and each and every injustice you can think of. We ask you to help us to continue supporting movement work in Chicago by making a donation to the James Thindwa Grassroots Organizing Fund. Information is on the screen and on our website. Please, please make a donation, contribute until it hurts, and thank you in advance. I now pass it over to Michael to guide us through the rest of the program. Over to you, Michael, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jane, for that welcome and for grounding us in James's life and work. My name is Michael Aguilar, and I'm part of the team at Crossroads Fund. Whether you're tuning in at home, at work, on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, thank you to everyone joining us for the third annual James Thindwa Grassroots Organizing Fund celebration, lovingly titled Don't Agonize, Organize, Building Worker Power. Today's program will feature the work of two amazing grantees, as well as an exciting conversation between Chicago Teachers Union President Stacey Davis Gates, local Starbucks organizer Jasper Booth Hodges, and Executive Director of Black Roots Alliance, Caitlin Johnson. The conversation will be moderated by University of Chicago history professor Gabriel Winan. Together, they'll also participate in a Q&A at the end of the program. So get your questions ready and definitely feel free to be active in the chat with your comments. Show some love, some affirmations, and some snaps along the way. And so for the first part of today's program, we'll be honoring two fantastic groups. This year, we are so proud to award two grants from the James Thindwa Grassroots Organizing Fund. The first is to Not Me, We. To accept the grant on behalf of Not Me We, please welcome Dixon Romeo as he shares more about their work.
Hey everybody, it's Dixon here with Not Me We, Dixon Romeo here with Not Me We. Want to thank you all for this grant from the James Thindwa Grassroots Organizing Fund. From everything that we've looked at, researched, we watched some videos on him together. We reached out and got some personal accounts from folks that knew him, and from everything we've been told, it's very clear that James's impact on the city, on other cities, right, on the nation, was really deep and impactful. And it's a delight for us to be a part of that by receiving this award and hoping to continue to work. For those of you who don't know, Not Me We started in 2020 in September during the early stages of the pandemic. And it was really a combination of some failed tenant organizing work and some really great mutual aid work happening at Parkside after the mayor cut the food program for 2 days during the uprisings, where we got together in Hassan Park on 68th and Oglesby, right? And we sat down and we realized that, if we wanted to control our destiny, control what happens to us in our community in this oncoming housing crisis, in this pandemic, right, that we had to come together and make our own group and learn to organize with folks from the community that live in the community, especially here in South Shore and the neighboring neighborhoods. And that's how we started. Since then, we've had, a lot of work, right, working with LSC, community members and parents at LSCs at Parkside, South Shore, International College Prep, High Park Academy, O'Keefe, in particular at High Park Academy, working in coalition with STOP to do the Cops Out of High Park campaign, where we got one officer out the school and got resources for a restorative justice coordinator and a peace room, right, with the mutual aid work that we've been doing around the community, but specifically at Parkside Academy, where we've done over 30 mutual aids. We basically do them almost every month, right, meeting people where they're at. And all of that work, right, has translated into more successful, right, tenant organizing, right, working with folks on Clyde, from Clyde to Ridgeland, South Shore Drive, and most notably working with tenants at 79th and Dante, going up against the former head of CHA, right, Vince Lane, who's a slumlord, right, tried to kick people out on Thanksgiving. We organized with tenants and fought back, and all of them to this day, right, have not been able to leave the neighborhood because of the work that we've done. Most importantly, I want to highlight the work that, when we looked up Mr. Thindwa, looking at the big box living wage ordinance work, right, going up against really big institutions, powerful folks fighting for what's important with folks. We want to talk about our work, working in coalition with Obama CBA Coalition to work to get the community benefits agreement for South Shore, in particular in the form of a South Shore housing ordinance, right? It's very clear to us as a group, right? We can be pro-Black, but you can't have pro-Black, anti-Black politics. That means that we're working with those most affected, right? We're working with and for poor Black folks, right? In order for folks to stay and benefit from the community, right? And that can't be something that's done by happenstance. It can't be something that's done, we hope that folks are able to benefit from these things, right? We have to put it in writing. We have to ensure folks have a place to stay so they can benefit from this center. And that's not going to happen without the CBA, and that's why we're fighting for it. We appreciate you all's support. And I think this award is an indication, and I hope, that just like as I've been told, Mr. Thindwa says, right, we're on the right side of the debate on this issue and many others. Again, I want to thank you all for this honor on behalf of Not Me We. My name is Dixon Romeo, and enjoy the rest of the program.
Thank you, Dixon, and to everyone at Not Me We for your powerful mutual aid and tenant organizing with South Shore residents, parents at local schools, and so many others on the South Side fighting for a community benefits agreement. If you'd like to learn more about Not Me We, follow them on Instagram, Facebook at NotMeWe_. Our next grant recipient is Survivors Know, and to accept and share more about their work, please welcome Meher Rahman, Sarah Heidbreder, Morgan Rumpel-Whiting, and Joellen Chernow.
And we are so proud to accept the grant from James Thindwa Grassroots Organizing Fund. Thank you so much. We are so grateful. Survivors Know is a membership-based organization that works at the intersection of survivor justice and workplace organizing to address sexual harassment and all forms of power-based violence in the workplace and in our communities. I'm part of the Anti-Violence Solidarity Circle through the AVSCs, frontline advocates who are often survivors themselves, set out to disrupt how gender-based violence is addressed in their communities. They are co-creating systems where survivors can actively define what justice looks like for them and where communities can work alongside advocates to end violence.
So when this opportunity came up, I was just hoping that, it would be really great to create a space that advocates can come together, connect, and maybe learn from each other, and also have a little bit of ongoing healing going, so we can work in this field sustainably.
One highlight from my experience with Survivors Know is that I met some incredible people. We both welcome each other into a safe and honest space. I'm a survivor of sexual and domestic violence. I've also experienced race-based trauma and childhood trauma, and I never felt quite welcomed in any space before, or like there was a space full of people who had similar experiences to me. So it's important to me and continues to be important to me because I realize there is space and I was welcome to it.
Our worker solidarity circles pair the survivor-centered, trauma-informed approach from our AVSCs to labor organizing. We try to meet survivors of workplace sexual violence wherever they are in their process by first meeting their immediate needs, whether that be housing, therapy, legal advocacy, but placing those needs within the larger context of system failure. We also focus on developing key organizing skills like navigating interpersonal and structural toxicity, cultivating community relationships and allies, public speaking, and power mapping. We're really excited to be receiving this funding from the James Thindwa Grassroots Organizing Fund because those resources are going directly towards our survivor justice residency. This residency will enable 2 organizers to really focus on building power within the hospitality industry and building survivor power for alternatives to our current systems. On a personal note, I actually worked with James Thindwa while he was at AFT, building bridges and alliances between parents and educators. And I think he'd really appreciate that this grant is going directly towards developing the next generation of organizers. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone at Survivors Know for your work in supporting survivors and building power in the hospitality industry. To learn more about the Survivors Know, please visit them at survivorsknow.org. Big congratulations to these 2 amazing groups, and thank you both for all of the work that you do to make change happen. And now to kick off our conversation, I'd like to welcome Gabriel Wynant, who will be moderating tonight's panel. Gabriel Wynant teaches labor and working class history at the University of Chicago. His book, The Next Shift, The Fall of Industry and the Rise of Healthcare in Rust Belt America, was published last year. When he's not in the classroom, he also organizes with the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. We're so glad to have you. Please welcome Gabriel.
Thank you, Michael, for that warm introduction. And I just want to say a quick word before we bring on the other panelists. I met James only once or twice. I haven't lived in Chicago very long. I moved here in 2020. And I met him once or twice in the years before that. But as I've gotten to know Chicago and gotten to know the progressive activist and movement world here in Chicago, I feel like I hear James's name at every turn. He just seems to be kind of everywhere. And it's so clear the impact that he made on so many people's lives and struggles. And that kind of legacy of solidarity is such an extraordinary monument to get to, for me to kind of get to, learn about and work in the shadow of and get to honor here today. So I'm really honored myself to get to participate in this event. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then we are going to have a discussion for a little while. Our three panelists today are Caitlin Johnson, who is Executive Director at Black Roots Alliance and a current board member at the Crossroads Fund. Stacey Davis Gates, who, as I'm sure everyone knows, is the current president of the Chicago Teachers Union. And Jasper Booth Hodges, who is an organizer and recent worker at Starbucks right down here in Hyde Park at 55th Street. So warm welcome to all three of you. Thank you for joining us here today.
Hi, everyone.
I'm very excited for this conversation. So I have some questions lined up, but I'm hoping that, and they're all pretty much for all of you, but I'm hoping that this will kind of become a conversation as we share experience and wisdom from the different struggles that we have all been part of. And so please feel free to, jump in, react. I don't want to run this, too strictly. My first question is about democracy. We're in a moment now when we're hearing a lot about attacks on our democracy, attacks on civil rights, attacks on voting rights, threats to the rule of law, and all that is obviously very important and critical. But workers' rights are often left out of that conversation, and that has really struck me, particularly as Amazon and Starbucks seem to be pretty brazenly right now defying the will of their workers and saying that labor law can't be enforced on them. And I think we see versions of this, across the American workplace and across the working class right now. So I'm curious for each of you in the organizing you have done and the organizing you will do, how you see the connection between the particular struggles you've been involved in and the overall state of our democracy and future of our democracy. Big question.
Well, I think thank you for the question, Gabriel. What's up, Caitlin and Jasper? Very good to see you, Caitlin, by the way. Good to see you. And honored to be here in the memory of James and the intensity and the urgency that he brought to his organizing and leadership. I hope I'm making him proud in both ways. That said, the reason why labor rights are not easily attached to women's rights, civil rights, voting rights, the anti-racism that is happening at fever pitch, the anti-democracy that we're experiencing is because we won't say it and connect the dots. And we, not me, because every time I get an opportunity, I think it's important to name the enemy as the same entities, institutions, organizations, political party. I think it is very important to draw those connections because I think when you draw those connections, your coalition becomes broader, it becomes stronger, and it becomes sharper. And I also think that naming them from all of those respective spaces also makes your enemy a lot smaller because it makes you a lot bigger. But that also means that there's a responsibility for everyone who is being impacted by the types of politics, policies, and rhetoric that's actually killing people in this moment to stand up and be counted. So it's a both and. It's not one or the other. It is one calling labor in. I think that our activist spaces, our organizing spaces, our community spaces, they have to say, yo, this is the same enemy. And if you hope to survive, you got to be in coalition and connected to us. And I think labor has to say out loud, the enemy is the same. We are invested in ameliorating the threat, which means that we're going to name the enemy and we're going to put power behind our work. So it's a both and.
Yeah, I think coming off of that too, a lot of, and it's true, a lot of people see it as a very separate issue, but one of the strongest ways we can organize is as workers, because especially with so many of us working for these corporations, a lot of us will look at, these bigger arguments and say oh, we need to take down, these nameless corporations. Well, don't leave them nameless. Name them. They're your employers. And you as the workers, we are the ones who are able to hold them accountable. And that's going to be how we're going to fight this imbalance, is not by, outside. If we work for a corporation, I with Starbucks, the people who can hold Starbucks accountable are the people who are already in there, and that's what they're doing, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I think also one of the things that stands out for me is recognizing that working conditions and living conditions are always connected. And when we talk about work-life balance, it's not always the frame of, well, these hours of day I'm working and somehow I'm able to turn off my personality or turn off my family because I'm at work, but recognizing all of us and all of our lives are connected to the work that we do, because the work that we do often supports our lives and supports how we take care of our family and the people that we love in our life. And when we try to separate the two, that is I think an attempt from the enemies that Stacey has mentioned, to dilute our power. Like if we only see ourselves as siloed in one area or another, we miss the opportunity to build the connections that we have with our neighbors, who are laborers and workers too, just in different ways, and being able to kind of see the value, and then thinking back, recognizing the way in particular that 10 years ago was the Chicago Teachers Union strike and the beginnings of Fight for 15. The deep recognition of community and labor connections helped catapult all of that into the stratosphere, and being able to, I think, with workers, being able to recognize that value is not just what you produce, that there's deep value in the craft and the skill and just in the presence that folks have, and when they're in the act of working, but also the disparities that take place in the workplace are taking place in housing, are taking place in all of the other issues that are interconnected, and a lot of the bad actors are in the same show together. So, and being able to kind of see that nothing can truly be separate.
I appreciate those answers, and especially what you just said, Caitlin, about how our relationships bear value, our relationships with each other, as well as kind of value, or in addition to and beyond the value that we create for whatever we might be employed to do. I want to kind of get a little more concrete about that, if we can. Since each of you talked about building connection in different ways, I want to prompt you all or invite you all to share a story from past organizing experience when you succeeded in, or your movement or your struggle succeeded in building a connection where you maybe didn't think it would be possible, or you thought it might be difficult to do that. I think those stories are really important to share.
Well, I can start. I know we had a lot of difficulties throughout our campaign, and even after winning our election, there was a lot of just people being unsure, what to trust. You had the organizing committee telling people one thing, you had the company coming down on them saying, oh, if you vote yes, you're going to lose everything. And at the end of the day, it's people have a lot to lose, and so it definitely got to a point where it's, people are asking for us for these explanations, and we're explaining as best we can. But it, there's at a certain point, where we know that, there are people have very understandable reasons to be apprehensive. And so I think what helped too was broadening even more, saying, hey, yeah, there are, our store was so small. It was a very small sample size of, people who had opinions to voice, in this small group. And so we started talking to, Starbucks Workers United is much larger than just our store. It's larger than Chicago. It's happening all over the country. And so we had, and this actually, when I was at Labor Notes, I met a bunch of people from all over the country, and we had a group of people who were traveling around, who were organizers from a bunch of different stores, and they were coming in to a bunch of different stores just to talk to the workers that were there, stores that were organizing or that were unionized, or ones that hadn't organized at all, and just talking to them and setting up with them so they could come in and have conversations with our coworkers as well, and give that outside, sort of inside and outside perspective of, hey, this is why I organized in my store, and this is what it means to me, and just broadening that even more, and reinforcing that this isn't just the 20 people at the 55th and Woodlawn store. This is Starbucks workers from all over the country who have the same problems, just with different names and faces, and realizing that, you know, we all have the same goal.
I really appreciate you sharing that, Jasper, because it reminded me of there was a big nationwide push around Fight for 15 and being able to see fast food workers from all across the country come together. And I think to the question of relationships and successes, in that organizing, also folks who didn't work at fast food places came to support the workers. People who maybe have been, removed from minimum wage jobs recognize the value of the people there, and the stories that we tell about that kind of time. That's when one of my strongest memories is being able to talk to people who were able to see the connection between their lived experience and the experience of workers in stores that were wholly in different cities and different, I guess, cultural contexts. But that sort of power is built by these connections and being able to see in each other our own humanity, and being able to win, not only to have changed the narrative about what it meant to fight for minimum wage and what it meant to have a union, but to have created a completely new standard of what it means to fight in that way. The narrative now, back then it was, $15 an hour was absolutely bizarre to request, and now it is absolutely a requirement and standard. And that could not have happened if not for workers and community members coming together to completely turn the tides of what it meant to be in solidarity with one another.
I think that the entire infrastructure of the work we do here at our union is rooted in a common good bargaining model that requires our connection to the community. Our members are common good practitioners. There's nowhere in the world that you can have as a worker a good experience in the Chicago public schools without a broader, deeper understanding of the way in which we experience school in Chicago and how it's predicated on segregation, housing covenants, actual places to contain people. And so everything that we experience as a result of that comes from a perspective of white supremacy and patriarchy. And so the only way that I've ever understood, and especially as a history teacher, how we overcome that, it's through movement, it's through coalition, and it is not singular. I mean, and compounding that, in which I think became very apparent for me, at least during the pandemic, and we've had all of the safety fights, is that our members, when they become a worker in the Chicago public schools, they also get a zip code in Chicago. So you're not just a worker, you're a resident. I'm not just a resident, I live in a city where I'm raising my family. So, and my children are likely going to the Chicago public schools as well. So all of these parts of me are connected to common good, because I need it as a resident, I need it as a mom, and I also need it as a worker because of the children that are coming into my space who are also impacted by the trauma of white supremacy. And the impacts of it, the generational impacts of it is what I meant to say. So I actually don't know how you have any type of organizing that isn't rooted in that, especially when it comes to a public accommodation like public education.
Thinking about the centrality of, as Stacey was just saying, of that kind of building connection, that kind of building coalition for all kinds of emancipatory movements. We all believe in that and we fight for it. And I think, when we're in public, especially, we really want to emphasize the centrality of that. And in my own experience, sometimes what that means is we tend to gloss over a little bit how hard it can be to build those connections, how much resistance there is to building the kinds of connections that our movements need. And so, since we are in a space here of reflection, rather than needing to go out and get work done this second, I thought we could maybe take a moment and talk about setbacks. I think that's an important thing to reflect on and learn from as well. And I would be curious to hear from each of you about organizing setbacks that you've experienced, particularly on this question of trying to build the sorts of connections that your movements and your struggles needed, and what you learned from those moments of difficulty.
I think there's a current moment of difficulty now for all who have been working to address criminal legal system reforms, and for some who are working towards abolition, in the backlash against the Safety Act and the pretrial fairness. All of that organizing has been taking place for quite some time, with some folks who are leading the charge now, having been working on it for almost a decade, and to have the opponents spin narratives that are anti-Black, that are fear-mongering, that are absolutely contrary to what's actually in the act. It could feel like a setback because so much work had been put into getting the initiatives passed, and so much work has been put into shifting and building community narratives that reframe what it means to be safe. To have folks coming out saying that this is like the purge, that are just patently untrue, feels like a setback. And I can say that for a lot of folks who are maybe not aware of what's happening with the Pretrial Fairness Act, please look into it, because it's something that can change the actual experience of what it means to work for justice and to find justice in this system that has been built to oppress us. So I think all of those setbacks, when there's such a strong counter narrative, after so much effort has been put into reimagining things from a more positive and more inclusive and more truly just place, it feels hard.
And Caitlin, can I follow up with you quickly? Sorry to jump back in, but I would just love to hear more about how you deal with the hardness of that for yourself, and thinking about your own experience, and then politically also how you think we should fight against a backlash like that.
I think that there are folks who are closer to the front lines than I am that you should ask that question to. But I think for me, part of it is anytime I hear someone in just general spaces, I'm hearing conversations about the purge law coming into effect, and immediately like inserting myself into conversations at the grocery store, because it's just it's so wrong, but it's a part of people's conversation now, and passing comments, being able to be a counterweight to that. But I would really look to the Chicago Community Bond Fund, Southsiders Organized for Unity and Liberation. So like they're really on the front lines and really challenging and taking charge on all of these issues.
And making the connection, Caitlin's talking about the Safety Act and the pushback against that, which is, at fever pitch right now. But it should also be said that Stand On Children, who promotes itself as a landing space for Black and Brown families to push for a better, equitable, choice-filled education, also supports candidates who, not Stand On Children, Inc., the Illinois Network of Charter Schools. Their advocacy group is supporting candidates who are leading the charge on repealing the Safety Act. And so I think about why they haven't then led the charge on the repeal of, poor disciplinary practices inside charter spaces. You see the same characters is the point that I'm trying to make. I can draw that connection very closely to what Caitlin just said, as in how children are treated, or how educators are treated when they push back against it. Just at Noble Street, there was a Black male educator, count how many you see in your schooling, who was put on suspension, or on leave, because he walked out in solidarity with his students who were pushing back against that. So the characters are the same, right? It's for us to name them and call us in and seek the coalition. But this whole concept that setback isn't a part of movement, I think is a part of history that we don't tell. It's also not the documentary space that we get to see. typically we're watching the documentary in the frame of triumph, of overcoming. We don't get to see, grapple with how in every movement there was always setback, there was always a rollback. This time period that we're experiencing should have been expected post first Black man president of the United States of America, regardless if we think he was not left enough or too center right or whatever our critique is. That was still a Black man. And in this country, when Black people typically obtain something that was usually or never obtained before, there is this, the system of rollback. We look at the enfranchisement of Black men. We look at Black men serving in state legislatures. And then we look at Black codes. And then we look at Jim Crow. And then we look at the penal system being used to maintain slavery effectively. So this is a part of our American history, and it is also a part of movement. Coalitions break, coalitions get weakened. This is a lot of trauma that we are experiencing collectively in a coalition, and we're not always equipped to absorb the trauma, deal with just the natural push and pull intentions in coalition, and then stay focused on the work at hand. That is a lot to ask. And if we're not surfacing that the trauma in itself is one of the biggest obstacles, all of us are doing this work because we've been radicalized. And if you take a look into and how we become radicalized, it's typically quite personal, and it comes from pain. And so we're carrying that into all of our coalition spaces without naming it. We call it other things. We fall out because of it. And then the work, the actual liberation we're seeking suffers. So I would say setback is both internal to the coalition and how we come to this work and how we don't name our trauma and figure out what supports we need to overcome it. And then it's also a part of how we live in a patriarchy, a white supremacist society that is determined to maintain those two things. And the challenges to it have to both be strong, focused, and sustainable. So rollback is a part of it. And the example that I would use that is still traumatic for me is in 2012, we go on this strike that is just like one of the most transformative experiences that I've ever had in my life. And then in 2013, Rahm Emanuel closes more than 50 schools and say, so what? Right? Which was one of the most disempowering, depressing, disappointing experiences that I've ever had. And that went in a swing of a year, right? So I would just say it's a part of it. I think our job is to build structures and supports to anticipate it.
Yeah. And I guess, they both gave amazing answers and said so many things that I'm not going to be able to come close to, but I do want to say, that our movement is so new. I mean, it started last year with Buffalo and then it blew up so quickly. I think one of the biggest challenges that we had at first was when we all came together at Labor Notes, and it was super exciting. We were thrilled to be able to all get together and have this, huge planning session basically. And then what ended up happening was we realized where a lot of our flaws and gaps were, where, we had a much bigger movement than any of us were really prepared to deal with, because we had all just been dealing with, our store or the couple of stores near us and talking to people on the Discord server. But getting all those people together, it was amazing. It was fantastic to feel that solidarity, but it was also made us realize how hard it was going to be to actually organize this huge group of people. And we ended up sitting in rooms at that convention talking for hours and just working a lot of this stuff out. And it was hard and it was emotional, and it was really frustrating sometimes because we were going in circles, and a lot of us, were, well, why can't we move on to something else? But those conversations were so important because we all came out of there with, a much better understanding of where we were and where we needed to be. And I think too, all of us sitting there watching Stacy speak at that convention was great for us too. Just really having that moment to ground us and be like, we're all here for the same reason, and we're realizing how much harder this is than any of us thought it was going to be, but we all came out of that more prepared to keep fighting and to fight stronger and more effectively.
So speaking of harder than you were prepared for, Jasper, would you say a word about the situation at your store now, and you know the fight that you're in, and then I'll invite our other two panelists to respond and share their thoughts on what's going on for you and how they might compare it to their own fights.
So I was separated about 2 months ago. My store is actually set to, negotiations are supposed to start on the 25th. So, you know, we'll see. But so I've definitely still been, you know, attending the meetings, and I've read over the proposals that the National Bargaining Committee has, and my roommates, one of them still works at the store and is active in the organizing committee. So I try to stay involved as much as I can, but you know, at the same time, I had to get another job. I'm in school. I have all these other things, but yeah, I think it's, but even that, you know, I was separated, and, you know, and I am fighting it. And, you know, I miss being a part of my team. I miss being able to support them as a member and not, you know, just from the outside. But at the same time, we successfully unionized the first Starbucks on the South Side, and I was the only casualty. We still won, you know? So at the end of the day, like, I'm going to land on my feet regardless, you know, and they're going into negotiations, and I'm, you know, supporting them as best I can. And they're doing amazing things. And, you know, I can only hope that they are going to set a precedent for more stores. You know, there are a few stores in Chicago that have unionized, and there's several more on the way, but I'm really hoping that the ones that we do have are going to be able to, you know, make it easier for everyone else.
So one kind of theme that has been coming up in this conversation already, and I want to draw out a little more, is the ways that different forms of oppression show up in our workplaces, and also, you know, and it can isolate us and weaken our movements and weaken our struggles, but also can provide sources of solidarity and strength within our workplaces at the same time, and in other kinds of community organizing, social movement activity of different kinds. So, for example, I know that Starbucks is I don't know about your store in particular on 55th, but I know the Starbucks workforce is a very heavily queer and non-binary workforce. I know that obviously as we've been talking about already, in the Chicago school system, and certainly in the Fight for 15, anti-racism, anti-patriarchal politics, feminist politics have been really important in building organization and building power. And I think this links back to something that Stacy said about actually taking care to build structures within our movements and within our organizations that give a place for us to work through the trauma and violence of the society that we live in. So I guess I'd be curious about, in all of these movements, how employers or other kinds of opponents, whether politicians or bosses or police or whatever it might be, how they've tried to mobilize racism and patriarchy and homophobia against movements in ways that you've seen, and also what kinds of structures and supports, as Stacy put it, you've seen workers and community members build to kind of work through whatever trauma they've got to carry from, you know, the violence of our society, and to actually turn that into a source of strength.
Well, I think the most clear example of that, which I did experience and I've seen from workers in a lot of different Starbucks stores, was, you know, just that Starbucks was one of the first corporations to blatantly give out, to say like, hey, we are going to explicitly provide coverage for transition related surgeries and things like that, you know, and that was great. That was why so many trans people wanted to work at Starbucks. And then when we started organizing, one of the first things they did was to tell all the trans workers, hey, you're going to lose your benefits. immediately weaponizing that the fact that we are relying on them for health coverage that we may not be able to get somewhere else. And personally, I experienced I didn't even have company insurance at the time. I had was working for the company, but I paid out of pocket for my top surgery. But I did have my manager say, oh, you should be grateful they paid for your transition. They didn't, but also, why are you bringing that up? Like, it's so yeah, it's definitely been hard to see that everywhere, but also, it's let us given us a lot of solidarity too, to just be like, hey, a lot of us came to work for this company because they said things that we believed in and they offered things that we needed. And for them to turn around and wave them in our face and say, hey, we're going to take this away, if anything, that made our argument stronger.
Caitlin or Stacy, on this point, any responses?
I think one of the things that I've seen around anti-Blackness is and kind of creating additional division is when folks mysteriously get promoted, and they all of a sudden have token Black folks in leadership that create like this illusion of look at how much we care about our Black workers, but then using that person to try to divide the broad worker base. I think I've seen that and enough times to see that it's a tactic that folks use even beyond worker organizing. Anytime a Black person is promoted to some level of quote unquote prestige and then given orders and talking points that end up being anti-worker or even anti-Black, and that the way they internalized anti-Blackness kind of comes out in that. That I think that's something that folks weaponize to cause division in organizing.
For me, what comes up is that how do we strategize? Going back to connecting the dots, one of the ways that the Ed Deform movement was able to, plant a flag as a civil rights issue is because labor can be slow to plant their flag as a civil rights space. I think having a very clear voice on the impact of public education, the lack of funding, the lack of opportunity is a civil rights issue. But is it the people who fund people like Darren Bailey who get to tell us, if this works or not? Is it the people who are also bad actors when it comes to women's reproductive rights, but all of a sudden have an idea of how this works in public education? I think it's always more than one thing, right? And immediately it is labor being very clear about naming the people who make up labor. We're Black, we're brown, we're female. So we get to say something about those things as well. We are all people, to be perfectly honest with you, all shapes, all sizes, all genders. We're LGBTQIA+. And so labor being able to use the word and in identifying who we are, and then feeling very comfortable enough to defend the worker as a whole person also comes to mind. I think that complicates how our opponents zero in on us. What has been one of the most difficult things for me to encounter, both as a history teacher and as a Black woman, is to hear Black people tell me about their experience with labor, which they don't know, because we don't say that labor is female. So of course it's a women's rights organization, right? Of course it is. But how are we pushing inside of labor to make that happen? If the workforce is female and teacher and public education is female, like, you could make an argument that the Chicago Teacher Union is a women's rights organization that has, in fact, created pay equity, because my steps and my lanes, that salary schedule, it would be the same for me or for Jasper, given our experience and our education, right? So that is pay equity. That is what a women's rights organization is supposed to do. And it just so happens that it's also happening within a labor union. So we have to name our identities and focus in on how we are connected to the specific affinity groups. I think it's also important, though, to know that there are reasons why that isn't done, because it does complicate solidarity if you're not willing to make that the solidarity practice, if you're not willing to confront it and then be okay with working through it and how it does challenge solidarity. And it's the only thing that's going to save our democracy is if we do it. What other spaces are both organized and resourced and have half a chance to stand up against the fascist policies of a DeSantis, who will, by the way, be a very formidable presidential candidate in 2024? And where Donald Trump was a buffoon, he's not.
Looking forward in time, you just said 2024, Stacey, and whether it's, the next 2 years, the next 6 months, or the next 10 years, I'm curious about here in Chicago, where you see the most opportunity for us to make connections, to grow, who you want to bring in, who you haven't brought in yet into, the struggles you've been part of, how you imagine our movements, 5 years from now or 10 years from now in a kind of best case scenario.
That's a great question, because I'm spending a lot of time with that. We too are thinking about the next 10 years. And the first thing that I'll say is that we need a new mayor in Chicago, because it is both this awful rerun of fighting mayors to get the bare minimum. So I do think that we need a new mayor. I mean, I think all of America knows that we think it's Brandon Johnson over here at the Chicago Teachers Union, because he is our brother, because he is accountable. And we think it is necessary to have someone who is in control of this city that gives us the ability to organize outside of where we've been organizing naturally, to actually bring about the infrastructural shifts that will be necessary in the face of a Ron DeSantis in 2024. I'll be honest with you, as bad as Lori Lightfoot is, Ron DeSantis is just as, if not more, destructive, and the two of them together will make it very hard for us to exist in the space of Chicago. So the question that we have to put before us is, in 10 years, what do we need to have? Do we need to have the 65,000 homeless people in Chicago actually housed, right? Do we need to have the nearly 20,000 students that are in temporary living situations unhoused, housed? And so walking backwards from 10 years, I think we need to set goals like that. And how do you set a goal like that and win it? Well, I think you got to do two things. You got to get, ineffective leadership off your neck. So you got to get rid of the mayor that you have, give yourself a little breathing room, and then you need to have a real fight with those who can afford to pay more, instead of, giving us things that we didn't ask for, and philanthropy, right? So I think you need to get progressive revenue anchored to pay for the things like housing that are going to continue to be an issue. Look, over 1 million people died in the pandemic that this country did not have any type of net to catch, right? And we're still losing people because we haven't figured out how to work in coalition with the people who are already trusted and on the ground to even make a discussion about a vaccine, to make that discussion make sense. And so we've lost ground because of a pandemic. And the question is, how do we make up that ground? With whom do we make up that ground? I think that's the question you're asking. I think worker centers, quite frankly, are a space in which we get to organize. I think about the parents who send their children to the Chicago public schools. They're workers. Sometimes they're working more than one job, and that doesn't even add up to a living wage. How is the Chicago Teachers Union talking to those parents? Parents who are already organized, parents who already understand their status as a worker. So how do we connect the worker experience and then broaden it to a common good experience? And I think you got to figure out, where do you release the pressure? Where do you release the pressure? Is it the local politics? Is it the state politics? Is it federal politics? And then where do you find the avenues to advance parts of the agenda that are critical? Housing is critical. Like, that is probably the most critical thing that we've encountered, that was exacerbated during the pandemic, that made it very clear for our members, if no one else, sheltering in place where? Homework where? Right? Social distancing in a 2-bedroom apartment with how many people? Right? So we have some real work to do in terms of naming the common good demands, but also finding the coalition that naturally folds into it.
So it's time for us to go into questions, but I want to give from the audience. So I want to give Jasper and Caitlin a chance to respond to this. And while they do, we have one question queued up, but let me invite the rest of the audience. Now is a good time to add your questions in the chat. But first, Jasper, Caitlin, if you want to respond on this.
Sure. I mean, I think 10 years from now, to really echo what Stacey shared is if we're able to have this vision and hold that vision and take the steps across multiple sectors to take pressure off, as she said, where we need to ideate and build, where we need to dismantle where we need to, and hold fast to that vision in intentional ways, and have really clear and a really clear analysis of how power can move and what power we need to build and wield in order to create that future. I think we can be anywhere we want to be in 10 years, but there's a certain level of dedication and rigor that will be necessary across multiple sectors of organizing, because the system as it stands just adjusts itself. It doesn't ever really fall until we actually create new structures that render these systems as obsolete. We end up continuing this cycle. So as folks are working to dismantle this current system, if we are able to also empower folks who are building up a new system, so that in 10 years, the shift is, oh, well, who uses rotary phones anymore? We got this new social cell phone. And so being able to do that is going to be important to where we can be in the future.
Thank you, Caitlin. Jasper, also the one question that has come in is for you, so I'll let you answer what you would like. Here it is on the bottom from Bill Ayers. Speaking of common good organizing, what is the ask, Jasper, for customers at 55th Street?
Yeah, so I guess I can probably get them both with this one, but so I mean, I'm very, very new to organizing, and I mean, I've been doing it for a little over a year at this point, and looking 10 years in the future, I mean, 10 years ago, I was a sophomore in high school. I was worried about passing chemistry. And I guess now I am in college and I'm once again worried about passing chemistry, but I'm also, doing all this stuff that I never imagined I would be close to. And so when I think about where we're going to go in the future, I look at, just how fast this movement grew and, what it spurred, even just around where we are. I mean, our store is right next to a few other businesses, Te Amo, across the street. Once we launched our campaign, I remember in the last panel that was on with you, Gabriel, they talked a little bit about their success in organizing and our collaboration. And even just those few connections, just seeing how that's going to multiply, like I have no idea where we're going to be in 10 years, but if we keep focusing on building those collaborations, it's going to be so much more than any of us could imagine. And as far as the what's the ask for customers at 55th, I think right now, I mean, we've got our representation right now. They're fighting for a contract, and what we really need is just the continued support from the community, just to come in to order easy drinks, tip, because those workers don't get paid enough, and just and just really reinforce that they have support from the community, because Starbucks is trying so hard to break up the unit to unit and to make them feel like they don't have any support other than the phony support that Starbucks is saying that they want to give them. So really just showing that the support they have in the community is stronger than the lies that Starbucks is telling them.
Okay, thanks, Jasper and Caitlin. Our next question is from Martha Biondi for Stacy. Stacy, can you tell us more about common good organizing and how it's taking unions in a maybe new direction, and how and why it's vital to labor's future?
That is the only future for labor. Hands down, I do not believe that labor can survive just off of wages and benefits. In fact, I was just distracted by a message from a member who was saying we're spending too much time on other issues and not enough time on bread and butter. And that type of argumentation, if you want to trigger like a fierce debate and argue with me, talk to me about bread and butter and ask me where the vegetables are, where the fruit is, where the protein is. You understand what I'm saying? Give me a couple side dishes as well, right? So why am I only, and I say this all the time, there's a whole damn buffet that rich people get to eat from all the time. And as a union member, the only argument that you can give me is that the only place for an organization as well resources ours, an organization with members who live in this city, that we only fight for a wage and a benefit. Will you tell me how damn good that wage and benefit is when you have students being murdered in the streets? You tell me how good that benefit is when you are afraid to allow your son to go to the movies with his friends for fear of what that may do to him, because we live in such a terrible society that fails to see his humanity, right? Those are my stresses, right? And that check doesn't resolve that stress. It just pays my rent or it pays my mortgage. It makes sure that I have gas or can give the money for him to get on public transportation that is unsafe. You understand what I'm saying? So I'm supposed to make my money and then go home and lock my door? Think about what even union members posit. So common good bargaining means that we get to live in a world where other people have and we do too. Common good bargaining means that we center the lives of actual human beings who want to be liberated. Women whose wounds don't need to be legislated by freak shows that come up with ideas that they don't even follow through on. See Herschel Walker, right? So this idea of common good bargaining is that if you are a teacher and you are a paraprofessional or a clinician and you live in the city of Chicago because you have to, well, I would think that all of these issues impact you because you live here, you're invested here, you're raising your family here. So the common good is actually pretty goddamn self-interested if you really want to know the truth, because I'm seeking a society where my son can live freely and actually become an adult with his hoodie on. I'm actually seeking a society where my neighbor gets a living wage job because she works in a fast food restaurant. I'm actually seeking a world where my neighbor who is retired can get a pension, so when she needs to put a roof on her house, she can put a roof on her house. All of this is self-interested. It just means who else gets to benefit from that self-interest. Common good means is that we're making a society that actually is humane and meets the needs of the people here, using the vehicle of labor to connect with community, neighborhoods, and the people we serve to make it happen. Sorry, I told you it was my trigger.
Okay, our third and final question, which all of you can take up as you like, is what is a movement win around labor organizing right now that is inspiring you and giving you hope?
Well, I'm digging Amazon right now. I'm digging Amazon. I'm digging Starbucks right now. I'm digging the fact that there is youthfulness in the way in which it's encountering the work, that it's not encountering it from the perspective that, I was acculturated in terms of what labor is. That it wears, Jordans and gold chains. that it speaks very naturally to the rights of women and the rights of Black people and the rights of migrants and the rights of immigrants and the LGBTQIA plus and everyone, our wholeness, the ands that we bring into labor. Those are the things giving me hope, because that's the only way forward. Like, our society is becoming so marginal and narrow until the thing that you have to do within in labor is open that baby up. And if we don't open it up, no one survives, because the enemy is discerned.
I want to thank Stacy for bringing up Amazon, because, you know, as unfortunately Chris couldn't be here today, but, you know, I really want to give a shout out to him and everything that he has done and continues to do for and with ALU. It was, and then also with us, I think probably the biggest thing that stands out to me right now for Starbucks is the Memphis 7, and them winning their reinstatement. I think has been such a huge thing and has been really grounding for all of us to see that, you know, especially after the disappointment with how Layla's trial worked out, and her not getting reinstated, seeing that those 7 workers in Memphis had to get their jobs back, I think really put a lot of fire under all of us. So that's been really good.
I think the only thing I can add is Amazon. You know, I think it's really exciting to see massive corporations like that get like tackled from the inside, like being able to really see folks like go after these Goliath institutions and win and be able to create opportunities. You know, I'm the only reason why I'm here tonight is because Chris couldn't be here. And so being able to like see that it happen in real time, the energy that it brings and how it can invigorate so many more workers, because they see Amazon, which is such a, you know, and Starbucks. I want to figure out how to be more supportive of the 55th and Woodlawn store, because that's a Starbucks that's close to where I live. It's like those places that are community institutions too, and as the workers rise up, the communities around them get an opportunity to build together, and I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, I'll just add to what all of you are saying as we move to wrap up here, that it's just popping off everywhere right now in a way that I think is worth taking a moment to really appreciate together, especially in retail. You know, Trader Joe's, Home Depot, Apple, Lowe's. I just saw there's a Lowe's in this, like a hardware store in the South, where they just petitioned for an election. And I would be remiss also if I did not say that graduate worker unionism is really like leveling up yet again. The union that I helped build when I was in graduate school, we got our asses beat at the time, and it, like a few years later already, it's back, it's at majority again, and that's happening everywhere. So it's a really, I think, exciting moment as well as a scary one. And you know, it's for all of us to put together the wisdom that you all have shared today to figure out how to build on that excitement and that possibility and that inspiration. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to be on this panel and share your experiences and your own inspiration and your own you know, hopes and fears for what's ahead for all of us. And that's where our strength comes from, as we've all been saying. And thank you to everyone for attending. This was a wonderful and moving event. So I appreciate everyone in the audience as well as our panelists.
Thank you so much, Gabriel, and thank you to our panel, Stacy, Jasper, and Caitlin, for your wisdom, for your passion, for your tenacity in organizing and building power toward collective liberation and toward a common good. As we close out, we want to express our deepest of gratitude to Martha Biondi, James's partner, for initiating the James Thindwa Grassroots Organizing Fund. We are so grateful to the Thindwa family and to the folks who knew James for stewarding his legacy for all of us. It's through your stories, your memories of James, that we're able to be rooted in radical love and full hearts as we continue to do this work. Of course, thank you to everyone who has contributed to the fund. Your generosity has made this day possible to give out grants and have this amazing panel of powerful organizers. We invite all of you to support the James Thindwa Fund On the screen is some information on how to make a donation. This can be a one-time donation, or you can sign up to be a sustainer to support this fund on an ongoing basis. All amounts are welcome, and just imagine the supports and infrastructure we can build together over the next 10 years with your donation. A strong labor movement, fully funded public schools, vibrant, thriving communities, and so much more. Please, please, please donate now. The link is on your screen. Thank you again for joining us this evening. Stay well, fight on, and remember to make a donation. Good night, everyone.